The cancer was going to kill him in 6 months, maybe 12 if he let them pump poison into his veins. But Jack Sullivan figured he'd take the 6. Better to die clear-headed than spend his last days vomiting into hospital toilets while strangers pretended they weren't watching him disintegrate. Dr. Morrison had laid it out that afternoon with the clinical detachment of a man who'd delivered this particular death sentence 1,000 times before. Stage 3 lung cancer, spread to the lymph nodes, treatment options limited, quality of life a consideration. Jack had stared at the x-rays on the light box, those ghostly images of his own betraying lungs clouded with masses that looked like storm systems on a weather map, and thought about Nancy. His wife had lasted 9 months with pancreatic cancer. He'd watched her shrink from 130 pounds to 87, watched her skin turn the color of old newsprint, watched morphine steal the last of her sharpness until she didn't recognize him anymore. That was 3 years ago. Their daughter Sarah had been there for the end, holding Nancy's other hand while machines beeped their countdown. Then the funeral, then the fight, then 15 years of silence that felt like its own kind of death. Jack's hands were steady on the wheel of his 1999 Ford F-150, the same truck he had bought the year Sarah graduated high school. The highway stretched ahead into gathering darkness, snow beginning to fall in fat, lazy flakes that turned the world soft and indistinct. January in Montana meant early sunsets and roads that could close without warning, the kind of weather that killed unprepared travelers with the casual indifference of a predator selecting the weakest from the herd. The radio was predicting a blizzard by midnight, highways shutting down, the National Weather Service urging people to stay home. Jack was 40 minutes from his house on the edge of town, the Victorian he and Nancy had restored together over 30 years of marriage, painting trim and replacing rotted floorboards, and arguing about wallpaper patterns in that easy way couples do when they have time to waste. Now he had 6 months, 182 days, give or take. He'd done the math sitting in Dr. Morrison's parking lot before starting the truck, his breath fogging the windshield while the numbers arranged themselves in his head with ruthless clarity. 26 weeks. 4,368 hours. And then nothing. No more sunrises over the Beartooth Range. No more coffee going bitter in the pot because he'd forgotten about it again. No more trudging through the motions of a life that had stopped meaning much after Nancy died and Sarah walked away. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he felt a strange calm settling into his bones. The same feeling he'd had during his last day as sheriff 5 years ago, when he'd handed over his badge and service weapon and walked out of the station knowing he'd never walk back in with authority. An ending approaching, inevitable and clean. No more waiting for the phone call that never came, Sarah's voice on the other end finally ready to talk. No more lying awake at 3 in the morning, wondering if she was alive or dead, or just done with him forever. 6 months would take him to July. Maybe he'd see one more Montana summer before the cancer finished what 40 years of Marlboros had started. He'd quit smoking the day Sarah was born, stood in the hospital parking lot, and crushed an entire pack under his boot heel like he was killing something dangerous. Nancy had laughed when he told her, that bright, delighted laugh that came from someplace deep in her chest where joy lived. Jack had meant it, meant the quitting, meant the promise that he'd be around for his daughter, meant all the things a man means when he's 25 and stupid enough to believe willpower matters more than biology. 30 years smoke-free, and the damage was already done. Cells mutating in the dark while he served warrants and investigated break-ins and told himself he was building something that mattered. The crying started as a sound he almost dismissed as wind. Highway 47 was empty this time of night, especially with weather turning, and his mind had been elsewhere. Dwelling on the past like an old man, which he supposed he was now, 65 years old with dying lungs and an empty house waiting for him. But the sound came again, cutting through the white noise of snow against windshield and tires on pavement, high and desperate and unmistakably human. A baby's cry, thin and fading, the kind of sound that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. Jack's foot was on the brake before his brain caught up. The truck slowed, fishtailing slightly on the fresh snow accumulating across asphalt. He cranked down the window and cold slammed into his face hard enough to make his eyes water. The crying was clearer now, coming from somewhere off to the right, maybe 50 yards into the darkness beyond the shoulder. Could be his imagination. Could be the cancer spreading to his brain earlier than expected, making him hear things that weren't there. Dr. Morrison hadn't mentioned hallucinations, but Jack knew enough about dying to understand the body quit in stages, betraying you one system at a time. Except the cry came again. Weaker this time, barely audible over the wind starting to howl as the storm system moved in with purpose. Jack pulled the truck onto the shoulder and killed the engine. In the sudden silence broken only by ticking metal and howling wind, he sat and listened. Nothing. Then, there. A tiny whale swallowed almost instantly by the storm, but real enough that his hands were already reaching for the door handle. 40 years as sheriff had taught him that isolation played tricks. Night shifts on empty highways could conjure sounds from nothing, tire noise becoming footsteps, wind and power lines becoming voices. He'd learned to trust his gut over his senses, and his gut said someone was out there needing help. Jack grabbed the mag light from under his seat and stepped into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow. Temperature had to be 15 below before wind chill, and the wind was gusting hard enough to make him stagger. Snow was coming down sideways now, visibility dropping to maybe 20 feet. Jack clicked on the flashlight and swept it across the landscape. Nothing but white and more white. Fence posts emerging from drifts like drowning men reaching for air. The crying had stopped. He waited, fighting the urge to get back in the truck where it was warm, where dying men belonged instead of stumbling around in blizzards chasing phantom sounds. Then he heard it again. Weaker still, barely a whimper, but coming from directly ahead. Jack pushed forward, boots sinking into knee-deep snow with every step. His lungs were already protesting, a tightness in his chest that might have been exertion or the cancer or both. The flashlight beam caught metal, chrome bumper, shattered taillight, the crumpled rear end of a sedan mostly buried in a drift. Jack's training kicked in automatically, assessing the scene even as he struggled through the snow. Single vehicle, off the road by at least 30 feet. Slammed into a concrete barrier that marked some long-abandoned ranch entrance. No skid marks visible in the fresh snow. How long had it been here? The crying was definitely coming from inside the car. Jack reached the passenger side and started clearing snow from the window with his free hand, ice burning against his palm, even through the leather glove. The dome light was on inside, battery still good, and in its weak glow he could see shapes, a car seat and back. Something small and pale wrapped in blankets. Moving, relief hit him hard enough to make his hands shake. The baby was alive. Jack tried the door, locked. He circled to the driver's side, clearing snow as he went, and that's when he saw her. The woman slumped over the deployed airbag, head tilted at an angle that screamed wrong even before he checked for a pulse. Long dark hair matted with frozen blood, skin the color of marble. Jack reached through the broken window, when had that happened, and pressed 2 fingers against her throat where the carotid should be pumping. Nothing. The cold had preserved her, but she'd been dead at least an hour, probably more. The airbag was stained dark where her face had impacted, and the steering wheel was bent from the force of her body hitting it after the airbag deflated. Jack's hand was moving toward his phone to call it in when the dome light shifted and he saw her face clearly for the first time. The phone slipped from his numb fingers into the snow. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment the world tilted sideways, gravity reversing itself so up was down and the ground rushed toward his face. He grabbed the car door to steady himself. Metal so cold it felt hot against his palm, and stared at the dead woman's face. Catherine Sarah Sullivan, his daughter, dead at 30 years old in a wrecked Honda Civic on Highway 47, while her father was 40 minutes away, learning he had 6 months to live. The sound that came out of Jack's mouth wasn't quite human, part sob, part roar, the noise a wounded animal makes when it's too hurt to run and too proud to lie down. He grabbed the door handle and yanked with everything he had, rational thought burning away in a surge of adrenaline and horror. The door was locked. The door was always fucking locked. Jack stumbled backward but fell into a drift, scrambled upright with snow filling his collar and his lungs screaming. Sarah's face in the dome light, eyes half open and seeing nothing. His baby girl who'd stopped being his baby when she was 25, and he was too much of a coward to hold her while she cried. The baby, Emma. The thought cut through his spiral like a knife. Sarah was dead. Sarah had been dead for hours while he sat in Dr. Morrison's office talking about treatment options and quality of life. But the baby was alive. Still crying, weaker now, hypothermia shutting her down 1 degree at a time. Jack forced himself to the passenger side, forced his cop brain to take over from his father brain, forced himself to see this as a scene instead of a nightmare. The window was intact. He needed something heavy. His flashlight was half buried in the snow where he'd dropped it. Jack grabbed it and swung with everything he had left. The flashlight bounced off safety glass without leaving a mark. He swung again, again. On the fourth hit, the glass spiderwebbed. On the fifth, it shattered inward in a shower of diamonds. Jack reached through and unlocked the door, wrenched it open, hard enough to strip something in his shoulder. The dome light brightened as the door opened. The baby, Emma, Sarah's baby, his granddaughter he'd never met and didn't know existed until this moment, lay in a car seat still buckled in properly. Newborn safe, the kind of seat you bought after reading all the reviews and checking crash test ratings. Sarah had always been careful like that, thorough. Emma's lips were blue. Her tiny face was the wrong color, that gray-white shade that meant the body was shutting down to preserve the core. Jack fumbled with the car seat buckle, his fingers too cold and clumsy. The 5-point harness, a puzzle his dying brain couldn't solve. Finally, the catch released. He lifted the entire car seat out. They told you never to remove babies from their seats after an accident. Something about neck injuries. And turned toward his truck. The wind hit him full in the face, driving snow into his eyes until he could barely see. Each step back was agony, legs burning and lungs on fire, and the car seat so much heavier than it should be. The truck seemed impossibly far away, a distant island of safety he'd never reach. Jack stumbled, caught himself, kept moving. If he stopped now, they'd find him in the morning, frozen solid with his granddaughter in his arms. The truck door was still open, interior light a beacon. Jack all but fell into the cab, pulling Emma in with him and slamming the door against the storm. His breath came in ragged gasps that hurt. The cancer, maybe, or just exhaustion, or the knowledge that Sarah was dead out there in the cold, and he'd never told her. Never said the things that mattered. Never called after that fight. Never swallowed his pride enough to say he was sorry. Emma had stopped crying. Jack's heart nearly stopped with her. He set the car seat on the passenger seat and stripped off his gloves with shaking hands, pressed his palm against her tiny chest. A heartbeat, faint and slow, but there. She was maybe 6 months old, he guessed, though what did he know about babies anymore? Sarah had been 6 months when she'd gotten her first tooth, and Nancy had laughed at Jack's panic, told him it was normal, showed him how to run a cool teething ring. That was 40 years ago when the world made sense. The truck's heater was blasting, but it wasn't enough. Hypothermia killed in stages. First the shivering, then the lethargy, then the sleep you didn't wake from. Emma wasn't shivering. That was bad. Jack yanked the emergency blanket from behind the seat and wrapped her, car seat and all, pulling her against his chest. His body heat might help, or it might not. He grabbed his phone from where it had fallen onto the floorboard, snow wet and barely functional. No signal. The storm was blocking everything. They were alone. Him and his dying granddaughter and Sarah's body slowly freezing in the wreckage. Jack did the only thing he could think of. He started the truck and cranked the heat to maximum, angled the vents toward Emma, and began checking her systematically the way he'd been taught in his first responder training 40 years ago. Airway clear, breathing shallow but regular. Pulse thready. Skin tone. Skin cold but not frozen. He rubbed her tiny hands between his palms, trying to generate warmth through friction. His thermos was still half full of coffee gone lukewarm. Jack soaked a corner of the blanket and let warm liquid drip onto Emma's lips. She didn't respond. The minutes crawled past, marked by his watch and the sound of wind battering the truck. Jack held Emma and rubbed her limbs and talked to her in a low, steady voice. The same voice he'd used with Sarah when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. Thunder was just clouds bumping into each other, he'd told her. Nothing to be scared of. Sarah had believed him back then, believed her father could protect her from anything, storms and monsters in the dark. Then she grew up and realized he was just a man who didn't know how to say I love you out loud, who showed affection through fixing things and providing and being present without ever really being there. After 20 minutes, Emma's color started to improve. After 30, her eyelids fluttered. After 45, she whimpered, a tiny sound that nearly broke him. Jack felt tears freezing on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. Emma's eyes opened, dark eyes like Sarah's, like Nancy's, and looked up at him with the unfocused confusion of someone waking from a nightmare. Then her face screwed up and she started to cry, a proper cry this time, angry and alive. Jack had never heard a more beautiful sound. He let her cry, holding her close and rocking slightly, humming a tune he didn't realize he remembered. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Nancy used to sing it to Sarah. Sarah probably sang it to Emma. The lullaby that traveled down through generations, simple and stupid and somehow perfect. Emma's crying gradually subsided into hiccups, then whimpers, then silence as exhaustion claimed her. Jack kept rocking anyway, afraid to stop, afraid that if he did, she'd slip away. The snow was piling up around the truck, drifts building against the doors. Jack's phone showed 2:47 a.m. and still no signal. The blizzard wouldn't break before dawn, and dawn was hours away. He was trapped here with a baby in his daughter's body and the knowledge that in 6 months none of this would matter, because he'd be dead too. The thought should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like failure. One more thing he hadn't finished. One more person he'd let down. Sarah's face in the dome light kept replaying behind his eyes. 30 years old, okay? She'd been 25 the last time they spoke, at Nancy's funeral when everything fell apart. That meant 15 years. Not 15 years, he corrected himself. 15 years this March. He knew the exact date, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, because Nancy had loved that holiday for no reason Jack could ever figure out. Irish heritage maybe, though her people had been in Montana since before statehood. She'd worn green and made corned beef and cabbage and played fiddle music too loud. Sarah had inherited that love of celebration, that ability to find joy in ordinary things. Jack had inherited the ability to ruin them. The memory came whether he wanted it or not, sharp and complete like a movie he'd watched too many times. The cemetery, small and windswept, located on a hill overlooking the valley Nancy had loved. March in Montana meant mud and lingering snow, the ugly season between winter and spring, when nothing was beautiful. Jack standing at the gravesite in his good suit, the one he'd worn to weddings and retirements, and now his wife's burial. Standing dry-eyed while the minister said words Jack didn't hear, watching them lower Nancy's casket into frozen ground. Sarah beside him, 25 years old, and sobbing into her hands, asking him over and over why he wasn't crying, why he just stood there like a statue when Mom was gone forever. Because crying wouldn't bring her back, he'd said. Because crying was private. Because men didn't fall apart in public where everyone could see. Because he'd already done his crying. 2 years of watching Nancy die by inches while he sat helpless, holding her hand and counting breaths, and learning that love wasn't enough to stop the inevitable. By the time they put her in the ground, Jack was hollowed out, empty of everything but the grim determination to get through the ceremony with dignity. Sarah hadn't understood. Of course she hadn't. She was 25 and still young enough to believe showing emotion meant having it. The fight had come later, at the house, after the neighbors left, and it was just the two of them in the kitchen that still smelled like Nancy's coffee. Sarah standing across from him with her mother's eyes and her mother's temper, demanding to know if he'd ever actually loved Nancy at all. How could he just stand there at the funeral? How could he not say anything? How had he lived with Nancy for 30 years without ever telling her he loved her where Sarah could hear it? Jack had tried to explain, badly, because words weren't his strength and never had been. He'd shown Nancy love every day through action, fixed the porch when it sagged, changed the oil in her car, sat with her during chemo. What did words matter compared to that? Sarah had looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Words were all that mattered, she'd said. Mom needed to hear it. Sarah needed to hear it. All Jack's fixing and providing and showing up meant nothing if he couldn't say 3 simple words. The argument spiraled from there, picking up momentum like a runaway truck. Sarah accusing him of being emotionally unavailable, shut down, cold. Jack defending himself poorly because how do you defend against the truth? He'd never been good with emotions. His father had been a taciturn farmer who measured love in acres plowed and bills paid. Jack had learned that same silent language and passed it down without realizing Sarah needed something different. By the time he understood what she was asking for, she was already walking toward her car with her keys in her hand and her face twisted with grief and fury. The last thing she'd said before driving away, I can't look at you and see Mom's face and know that you never told her what she meant. The last thing he'd said back, where are you going? Like that mattered. Like the destination was the point. She'd left and he'd stood in the driveway watching her taillights disappear, telling himself she'd cool down and come back and they'd figure it out. Instead, she'd vanished, changed her number, stopped returning emails, moved somewhere he couldn't find her. 15 years of silence that he'd told himself was what she wanted, what she needed, space to grieve without his inadequate presence reminding her of everything he'd failed to be. Now she was dead, dead in her car with a baby in the back seat, and Jack would never get the chance to tell her he was sorry. Sorry he'd failed Nancy. Sorry he'd failed Sarah. Sorry he didn't know how to be the father she needed instead of the father his father had taught him to be. The words she'd wanted from him were locked inside a dead man's mouth, and in 6 months he'd take them to the grave. Emma stirred against his chest, making the small, snuffling sounds babies make in sleep. Jack looked down at her, this tiny stranger who was his last living blood relative, and felt something shift in his chest. Not grief exactly, though there was plenty of that. Something harder to name. Purpose maybe, or obligation. This baby girl had almost died tonight. Would have died if Jack hadn't been driving past at the exact right moment. Sarah's last act had been strapping Emma into her car seat properly, making sure she was secure and safe before what? Before the accident. If it was an accident. Jack's cop instincts were starting to whisper questions underneath the grief. Why was Sarah driving on Highway 47 at night in a blizzard? Where was she going? Where was she coming from? Why was she alone? The questions could wait. Right now, all that mattered was keeping Emma alive until help arrived. Jack held her and watched snow pile against the windshield and thought about last acts. Nancy's last act had been squeezing his hand and saying his name. Not clearly, but he'd known what she meant. His last act, he'd thought up until tonight, would be dying alone in the house. He couldn't make himself change because changing it meant accepting Nancy was really gone. Now maybe his last act would be something different. 6 months, half a year. Enough time to make sure Emma was safe, provided for, placed with someone who could love her the way Jack had never learned to love properly. The sky was starting to lighten toward dawn when Jack saw headlights cutting through the snow. Red and blue flashers followed. Sheriff's Department. He felt a wash of relief so strong it made him dizzy. Help had arrived. He wouldn't have to watch his granddaughter die in his arms. Whatever happened next, at least he'd done this much. The flashers stopped behind his truck and a figure emerged, bulky in a winter parka. Jack recognized the walk before he saw the face. Tom Reeves, 45 years old, and sheriff for the past 3 years since Jack retired. Jack had trained him from rookie, taught him everything he knew about policing a county where everyone knew everyone and secrets were currency. Tom trudged through the drifts to Jack's window and leaned in, his face creased with concern and confusion. Jack rolled down the window and cold flooded back in. Tom's expression shifted as he took in the scene. Jack holding a baby, both of them wrapped in emergency blankets, Jack's face telling a story Tom didn't want to read. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Jack's voice came out rough, scraped raw by cold and grief. "Call it in. Fatality accident, approximately midnight. Driver deceased. Infant survivor, hypothermic but stable." Tom's training kicked in automatically, reaching for his radio. Then he stopped, looking more closely at Jack's face. "Who's the driver?" Jack couldn't say it. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. Tom waited, patient the way Jack had taught him to be with witnesses in shock. Finally, Jack forced it out. "My daughter, Catherine." The silence that followed was so complete Jack could hear his own heartbeat. Tom knew about the estrangement. Everyone who'd worked with Jack knew it wasn't something you could hide in a county this small. Tom's expression cycled through shock to sympathy to professional determination. Jesus, Jack, I'm so sorry. Where is she? Jack gestured toward the wreckage, barely visible through the snow. In the car, been dead at least 2 hours, maybe more. And the baby? Emma, granddaughter I didn't know existed. Tom processed this, then got on his radio and started calling in the cavalry. Ambulance, coroner, state patrol if the roads were passable. Jack half listened, his attention on Emma, who was starting to wake again, whimpering in discomfort. Tom finished his calls and came back to the window. Ambulance is 20 minutes out. We need to get you both warm. Jack shook his head. Can't leave Sarah out there alone. She's gone, Jack. You know that. Doesn't mean I leave her. Tom didn't argue. He trudged to his cruiser and came back with more blankets, helped Jack wrap Emma more thoroughly. They sat in silence while the sky continued to lighten and the snow began to ease. Other vehicles arrived, the ambulance first, then the coroner's van, then a state patrol cruiser that had made it through from the county line. Paramedics swarmed Jack's truck, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes taking Emma from his arms despite his reluctance to let go. We've got her, Mr. Sullivan. Let us work. Jack watched them carry Emma to the ambulance, disappearing inside with their medical bags and equipment. Tom helped him out of the truck, steadying him when his legs nearly gave out. Standing upright after sitting for 6 hours sent pains shooting through Jack's lower back and hips, arthritis and cancer and 65 years combining into a symphony of hurt. He limped toward Sarah's car, needing to see her again, needing it to be real. The coroner was already there, a young guy Jack didn't recognize, probably hired in the last 5 years. He looked up as Jack approached. Started to say something about contaminating a scene. Tom cut him off with a look. This is Sheriff Sullivan, the former sheriff. That's his daughter. The young coroner's face shifted, professional detachment giving way to awkward compassion. I'm very sorry for your loss. Jack ignored him, looking past into the car, where Sarah's body sat frozen in death. Someone had closed her eyes. That was good. He couldn't have handled seeing them staring at nothing. Her face was peaceful in death, the way dying people's faces never actually were. But Jack didn't need the pretty lie. He'd seen enough death to know Sarah's last moments had been terror and pain and the desperate hope that Emma would be found. She'd buckled that car seat so carefully, made sure her daughter was safe even knowing she was dying. The young coroner was saying something about procedures, about needing to transport the body for autopsy, about estimated time of death. Jack wasn't listening. He was looking at Sarah's hands, still gripping the wheel, looking at her hair, the same dark brown Nancy's had been before the cancer took it, looking at her and cataloging all the ways she resembled the girl he'd watched graduate high school and all the ways she'd become a stranger. 15 years was enough time to become a different person. Apparently, it was enough time to become a mother. Tom's hand on his shoulder pulled him back. Jack, we need to let them work. You need to get checked out. You were in that truck all night with no heat. The truck had heat, you know what I mean? Jack let himself be led away, back to Tom's cruiser where he could sit while the professionals did their jobs. The ambulance was already leaving, sirens cutting through the dawn. Emma on her way to County General where they had warming equipment and pediatric specialists and all the things babies needed when they'd nearly frozen to death. Jack should be with her. Except he was here, watching strangers zip his daughter into a body bag and load her into a van. Watching them photograph the scene and measure skid marks and treat Sarah like evidence instead of a person who'd laughed and cried and made all the mistakes young people make when they think they have time to fix them. The questions he'd pushed aside in the night came flooding back. Tom was on his phone coordinating something when Jack grabbed his arm. Scene photos. I need to see them. Jack, now Tom, please. Tom hesitated, then pulled up images on his phone from the state patrol photographer. Jack scrolled through them with the cold detachment of a cop examining evidence. Exterior damage, front end crushed, driver's side crumpled inward. Interior, airbag deployment, steering wheel bent, blood spatter consistent with blunt force trauma. Road conditions, snow obscuring most tire marks but some visible leading up to the barrier. Jack zoomed in on those marks. Single set, Sarah's Honda. But there, barely visible, a second set of tracks. Larger vehicle, wider wheelbase. Pickup truck maybe, or SUV. Tom saw where he was looking. Could be nothing. Could be someone else who came through before the snow covered everything. Could be someone ran her off the road. That's a leap, is it? Young woman driving alone at night in a blizzard? Where was she going? Tom? Where was she coming from? Why was she on Highway 47 instead of Interstate 90? Tom didn't have answers, neither did Jack. But the questions were starting to form a picture he didn't like. Shadow details emerging from fog. Sarah had been running from something, or towards something. Either way, this crash wasn't the accident the scene wanted him to believe it was. The coroner's van pulled away with Sarah's body inside. Jack watched it go, trailer lights fading into gray morning. Tom was still talking about procedures and protocols and things that needed to happen. Jack let the words wash over him until one phrase cut through the noise. FBI called, said they need to talk to you about Catherine. FBI? Yeah. Apparently your daughter was on their radar. They're sending someone this morning. For what? Tom's expression said he knew more than he wanted to say. Better let them tell you. But Jack, whatever Sarah was into, it's bigger than a car accident. The drive to County General took 40 minutes through snow that was finally stopping. Jack rode with Tom, neither of them talking much, the silence comfortable in the way it can only be between people who've known each other long enough that words are optional. Jack watched Montana scroll past outside the window. Fence posts and empty fields and the Beartooth Range in the distance. Mountains older than anything human pretending to care about. This land had been here before his family arrived and would be here after his cancer ate its way through his lungs. Emma would grow up seeing these same mountains, if she survived. If Jack could figure out how to keep her alive and safe when he didn't know the first thing about babies and had 6 months before his expiration date. The hospital was the same building where Nancy had died, where Sarah had been born 30 years earlier, where Jack had spent too many hours in waiting rooms reading old magazines and drinking terrible coffee. He knew the layout by heart. Emergency entrance to the left, main entrance front and center, loading docks around back where the real work of dying happened away from public view. Tom parked an emergency and they walked in together, boots tracking melting snow across tile floors. A nurse at the intake desk looked up and her expression shifted to recognition mixed with sympathy. Half the hospital had probably heard by now. Small county, smaller network of people who knew everyone's business. Sarah Sullivan's baby brought in after Sarah Sullivan's fatal accident, while Sarah Sullivan's father sat in a truck all night keeping the infant alive. The story was already writing itself, details being embroidered in break rooms and passed between shifts. Emma's in pediatrics, the nurse said. 4th floor, Dr. Sharma is handling her case. Jack thanked her and headed for the elevators with Tom trailing behind. The 4th floor was quieter, painted in the aggressive pastels that someone had decided made sick children feel better. Jack had always hated these colors, aggressively cheerful yellows and pinks that tried too hard. Nancy had liked them, though, said they were hopeful. Jack figured hope was just another word for denial. Sharma met them in the hallway outside the pediatric wing, a small woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back, and the kind of exhausted competence that came from too many years dealing with sick kids. She shook Jack's hand with a firm grip. Mr. Sullivan, your granddaughter is stable. We've treated the hypothermia successfully, and she's warming up nicely. No frostbite, no apparent neurological damage. She was very lucky. Lucky. The word sat wrong. Emma wasn't lucky. She was alive because her mother had strapped her in carefully, and Jack had happened to be driving past at the right moment. Luck was something you bought lottery tickets hoping for. This was survival, purchased with Sarah's death. Can I see her? Of course. But Mr. Sullivan, we need to discuss some things first. Does Emma have a father? Jack realized he had no idea. Sarah might have been married, might have had a partner, might have been single. 15 years of silence meant Jack didn't know anything about her life. I don't know. Sharma's expression said she was used to complicated family situations. Well, until we can locate next of kin, you're her closest living relative. That means some decisions will fall to you. Child Protective Services has been notified. A social worker will be here shortly to discuss temporary placement. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. Placement? Emma is 6 months old. She needs round-the-clock care. If there's no other family, or the other family, she'll need to be placed with a foster family until, she's staying with me. The words came out before Jack had thought them through. Pure instinct overriding reason. Dr. Sharma exchanged a glance with Tom that Jack couldn't quite read. Mr. Sullivan, I understand you're grieving, but raising an infant requires I'm her grandfather. Her mother just died. I'm not sending her into the system. Tom spoke up quietly. Jack, maybe we should talk about this. Jack turned on him with more force than he'd intended. My daughter is dead. My granddaughter just survived hypothermia. What's there to talk about? You're 65 years old and... Tom stopped himself, but Jack knew where he had been going. And dying. You're dying and you think you can raise a baby? Dr. Sharma intervened before the situation escalated. Why don't we table this discussion for now? Mr. Sullivan, come meet Emma. Then we can figure out next steps. She led them through double doors into the pediatric ward, past rooms full of sleeping children connected to machines that beeped and hummed. Emma was in a private room at the end of the hall, lying in a warming bassinet that kept her temperature regulated. Jack stopped in the doorway, suddenly afraid to go further. This tiny person represented everything he didn't know how to do, everything he'd failed at with Sarah. What business did he have trying again? But Emma saw him, and her face scrunched up, and she started to cry. Not the weak whimper from the truck, but a proper wail that said she was alive and angry about her circumstances. Jack found himself moving forward without deciding to, crossing the room until he stood over the bassinet looking down at his granddaughter. She was beautiful the way all babies are beautiful, alien and perfect at once. Dark eyes like Sarah's, like Nancy's before her. Tiny fists waving in indignation. Jack reached out carefully and Emma's hand found his finger, gripped it with surprising strength. The crying stopped. Her eyes focused on his face with the intensity babies have before they learn to hide their emotions. Hey there, he said quietly. I'm your grandpa. We haven't met yet, but I was there last night. In the truck. You're safe now. Emma's grip tightened. Jack felt something in his chest crack open, grief and love and terror mixing into something he couldn't name. He'd failed Sarah. Let her walk away and never gone after her. Let pride and stubbornness and his own emotional inadequacy destroy their relationship. Now Sarah was dead and this baby was all Jack had left, all that remained of his family line. Emma Nancy Sullivan, named for his wife without him knowing, carrying their legacy forward into a world Jack was about to leave. 6 months. He had 6 months to figure out how to keep her safe, to make sure she landed somewhere good when he died. 6 months to do what he should have done with Sarah. Show up, stay present, love out loud in ways that couldn't be misunderstood. The task felt impossible. Jack had never been good at the soft things, the gentle things. His hands were rough from 40 years of hard work, and his heart was rougher from 65 years of life in Montana, where tenderness was a luxury men couldn't afford. But Emma was looking at him with total trust, complete faith that this stranger would protect her, because babies didn't know yet that people fail each other. Jack made a decision. Maybe his last good decision, maybe the only one that mattered. I'll do it, he said to Dr. Sharma without looking away from Emma. I'll take care of her, however long I've got. Mr. Sullivan, Jack cut her off. I know I'm old, I know I'm not ideal, but she's mine and I'm keeping her. We'll figure out the rest. Dr. Sharma looked at Tom, who shrugged. Jack Sullivan was the most stubborn man I ever met, Tom said. When he decides something, arguing is just wasting breath. Then I'll notify Child Services that you're seeking custody, Dr. Sharma said. But Mr. Sullivan, they're going to have questions about your health, your ability to provide care, your living situation. I'll answer them. There's something else. The social worker coming, Mrs. Patterson, she's very thorough. And with your daughter's death being investigated, there will be scrutiny. Investigated how? Dr. Sharma looked uncomfortable. The FBI is here. They've been waiting to talk to you. Something about your daughter being involved with, she paused, choosing words carefully, with people under federal investigation. The FBI agent waiting in the hospital conference room looked exactly like what Jack expected federal law enforcement to look like. Pressed suit despite the early hour, laptop open on the table, expression carefully neutral in that way people practiced when they delivered bad news for a living. Agent Carlos Rivera introduced himself with a handshake that managed to convey both sympathy and professional distance, the kind of greeting Jack had given 1,000 times to victims' families when he wore a badge. "We need to talk about your daughter's activities over the past 3 years." Jack lowered himself into a chair across the table, every joint in his body screaming protest. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion so profound he could barely keep his eyes open. Tom sat beside him, present but silent, backup in case Jack needed it. "I don't know anything about Sarah's activities. We hadn't spoken in 15 years. Rivera opened a folder, slid a photograph across the table. Sarah standing outside an office building Jack didn't recognize, talking to a man in an expensive suit. The photo was surveillance quality, grainy and distant, but clear enough. This was taken 8 months ago in Billings. The man she's speaking with is Victor Volkov. Does that name mean anything to you?" "No, Volkov runs an import-export company called Volkov Enterprises. On paper, it's legitimate, moving freight between Montana, Idaho, and Canada. In reality, it's a front for human trafficking. Young women from Eastern Europe brought across the Canadian border, distributed through what Volkov calls his hospitality network. Strip clubs, massage parlors, escort services. Your daughter was his accountant." The words hit like physical blows. Jack stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the woman in the image with the daughter he remembered. Sarah had gotten her degree in accounting, he knew that much. Nancy had told him before she died, mentioned it in passing, like maybe the shared information would bridge the gap between Jack and their daughter. Now that degree had led Sarah into the orbit of a human trafficker. She knew what he was doing. Rivera's expression suggested the question was more complicated than Jack wanted it to be. "We think so." The bookkeeping was sophisticated, multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. Someone with basic accounting skills couldn't have managed it. But whether Sarah participated willingly or was coerced, we're not sure. Tom leaned forward. "You're saying she might have been a victim? We're saying the situation was complex. 3 days before she died, Sarah contacted our field office, said she had evidence against Volkov, complete financial records, shipping manifests, communications logs. She wanted witness protection in exchange for testimony. Jack's detective instincts, dormant for 5 years but never gone, started assembling the pieces. Volkov found out she was talking to you." Rivera nodded. "We don't know how. We were careful with the contact, used secure lines, didn't bring her into the office. But somehow Volkov learned she'd flipped. The night she died, she called our duty officer in a panic, said someone had found out, said she was taking her daughter and running. That was 11:47 p.m. Highway Patrol got the accident report at 12:32 a.m. 45 minutes, Jack said. 45 minutes from making that call to dying on Highway 47. Where was she going? We don't know. The location we'd arranged for her pickup was in Bozeman, 70 miles northwest. She was driving southeast when she crashed, away from safety, toward nothing, just empty highway. Unless she wasn't running to somewhere, she was running from someone. That's our working theory." Jack thought about the second set of tire tracks at the accident scene, the way Sarah's car had hit the barrier at an angle that suggested evasive maneuvering rather than weather-related skidding. Someone ran her off the road. Rivera's silence was confirmation enough. Jack felt rage building in his chest, hot and clean, burning through the exhaustion and grief. His daughter had been murdered, not killed in an accident, not lost to random chance, but deliberately run off a highway in a blizzard while trying to protect her baby. The why and who were questions that needed answering. Needed it with the kind of urgency Jack hadn't felt about anything in 5 years. What evidence did Sarah have? That's what we need to find. She mentioned a thumb drive when she called, said she'd hidden it somewhere safe, said we'd know where to look. We searched her apartment in Billings after she died. Nothing. Searched her car at the impound lot. Nothing. Either she was lying about having evidence, or it's somewhere we haven't thought to check. Jack stood, the motion sending pains shooting through his lower back. I need to see her apartment. Mr. Sullivan, now, today. Whatever Sarah had, I'll find it. That's what I do. Did. Whatever. Rivera exchanged glances with Tom, some silent communication passing between them that Jack was too tired to decode. We've already processed the scene. There's nothing there. Then it won't hurt for me to look. You're not law enforcement anymore. I can't bring a civilian into an active investigation. Jack leaned forward, palms flat on the table, the posture he'd used for 40 years when someone needed to understand he wasn't asking permission. That's my daughter who died. My granddaughter who almost froze to death. You want Volkov? I want him more. And I know how to find evidence when federal agents miss it because I spent 4 decades doing exactly that in a county where people hide things in ways city cops don't understand. Rivera considered this, then closed his laptop with a decisive click. Fine, but we do this my way. You see what I allow you to see, touch what I say you can touch, and if you find something, it goes through proper channels. Agreed? Agreed. Tom stood as well. I'm coming too. Rivera looked like he wanted to argue but recognized futility when he saw it. Fine. We leave in an hour. Mr. Sullivan, you should get checked out by a doctor first. You were exposed to extreme cold for 6 hours. Hypothermia has delayed effects. I'm fine. You're 65 with... Rivera stopped himself, but Jack knew what he'd been about to say. With cancer. With a death sentence. With no business playing detective when he should be arranging his own affairs. With a granddaughter who needs me, Jack finished. The medical evaluation can wait. The drive to Billings took 2 hours through roads still treacherous with packed snow. Jack rode in Rivera's government SUV, while Tom followed in his sheriff's cruiser, probably planning to tail them the entire way, because that's what good cops did when civilians inserted themselves into federal investigations. Jack spent the drive staring out the window at Montana scrolling past, the same landscape he'd patrolled for decades now, looking foreign and hostile. Somewhere in these mountains and valleys, Victor Volkov was conducting business as usual, moving his human cargo and counting his money, while Sarah's body lay in a morgue cooling toward room temperature. Rivera made phone calls in the careful language of federal bureaucracy, coordinating with other agents and updating supervisors on the situation. Jack half listened, picking out the relevant details. Volkov had multiple operations across 3 states, over 40 women trafficked in the past 2 years that they knew about, probably more they didn't. Diplomatic complications because some of the victims were foreign nationals, jurisdictional headaches, the usual mess that happened when criminals were smart enough to spread their crimes across multiple law enforcement territories. Sarah's apartment was in a modest complex on the outskirts of Billings, the kind of place where people minded their own business and turnover was high enough that neighbors never learned each other's names. Rivera led Jack and Tom to a second-floor unit at the end of a breezeway. Yellow crime scene tape still stretched across the doorframe. Inside, the apartment had the violated feeling of a space thoroughly searched by professionals. Furniture moved away from walls, drawers pulled out, even the refrigerator standing open with its contents examined and discarded. Jack stood in the center of the living room and tried to see it through fresh eyes, tried to forget he was looking at his daughter's home and treat it like any other crime scene. The furniture was cheap but well-maintained, the kind of stuff you build at discount stores and expected to replace eventually. Nothing on the walls except a single photograph. Emma as a newborn, impossibly tiny, eyes closed in sleep. No other personal touches. No artwork, no decorations. Nothing that suggested Sarah had intended this place to be permanent. You said you searched thoroughly, Rivera gestured around the room. Every inch, pulled up the carpet, checked inside light fixtures, dismantled the plumbing traps. If something was here, we would have found it, unless you weren't looking for the right thing. Jack moved through the apartment slowly, cataloging details the way he'd been trained. The bedroom held a single bed neatly made, a dresser with clothes folded inside, a closet containing 3 outfits appropriate for office work. The bathroom revealed drugstore makeup and generic toiletries. The kitchen showed someone who cooked occasionally but not enthusiastically. Everything pointed to a person living minimally, keeping her footprint small, ready to leave at a moment's notice. In the nursery, barely more than a converted closet, Jack found evidence of the only thing Sarah had invested in. A crib with a good mattress, expensive compared to everything else in the apartment. A changing table stocked with premium diapers. Toys that looked carefully selected for developmental appropriateness. Books stacked on a shelf. Titles Jack recognized from reading to Sarah 40 years ago. Here was where Sarah had spent her emotional energy, the one area of life she hadn't kept provisional. Jack picked up one of the books. Where the Wild Things Are, the same copy he'd read to Sarah, or maybe just the same edition. The binding was worn from repeated readings. He flipped through pages and a photograph fell out, landing face up on the floor. Jack bent to retrieve it and his breath caught. The photo showed Sarah pregnant, maybe 7 months along, standing in front of this same bookshelf. But she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera. The man was tall, dark-haired, wearing a leather vest over a black t-shirt. On the vest's back, visible because of the angle, was a patch Jack recognized, a crowned skull with iron wings. Iron Oath Motorcycle Club, Montana chapter. Rivera was beside him in 2 strides, taking the photograph with gloved hands. I'll be damned, we knew she had a partner, but we couldn't ID him. Volkov wouldn't talk, his people wouldn't talk, and Sarah didn't mention anyone in her calls to us. Jack stared at the image, this frozen moment of happiness in what had clearly been a complicated and dangerous life. Sarah looked genuinely joyful. The tension visible in her office surveillance photo completely absent. The man beside her looked protective, without being possessive, one hand on her belly where Emma was growing. That's Cole Warren, Tom said quietly from the doorway. They call him Reaper. He's president of the Iron Oath Montana chapter. You know him? Tom nodded. He's been mostly clean since getting out of prison 2 years ago. Manslaughter charge, bar fight that went too far. Served 18 months. Word is he's been trying to go legitimate, keep his club out of the kind of trouble that brings federal attention. Rivera pulled out his phone, photographing the picture. This changes things. If Warren was Emma's father, he has parental rights. We need to locate him and determine his level of involvement in Volkov's operation. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. Emma's father was an outlaw biker who might be connected to the man who killed Sarah. The custody situation had just become exponentially more complicated. They moved through the rest of the apartment in silence, Jack's hope of finding evidence fading with each empty drawer and bare surface. Sarah had been smart, too smart to leave a thumb drive somewhere obvious, too careful to trust that her apartment wouldn't be searched if things went wrong. Whatever she'd hidden, it wasn't here. Back in the living room, Jack sank onto the couch and tried to think like his daughter. She'd known she was in danger, known Volkov might come for her, known she needed insurance. Where would she hide something important? Somewhere FBI wouldn't think to look, but someone who knew her might. Somewhere connected to Emma, because Emma was all that mattered to Sarah in the end. The car seat. Rivera looked up from examining the kitchen cabinets. What? The car seat Emma was in. When I pulled her out, it was buckled in tight, really tight. Like Sarah had made absolutely sure it wouldn't move no matter what happened. We examined the car seat at the hospital. It was just a car seat. Was it? Did you take it apart? Rivera pulled out his phone, made a call. Jack listened to one side of the conversation. Brief, clipped, ending with Rivera's expression shifting from skepticism to interest. They still have it at County General. We can get there in 2 hours. Then let's go. The drive back was faster, Rivera pushing the SUV hard on cleared highways, while Jack sat in silence, turning possibilities over in his mind. If the evidence was in the car seat, that meant Sarah had prepared for the worst-case scenario. Prepared for dying, prepared for Emma being found by strangers, prepared to leave behind the means to destroy Volkov even if she couldn't testify herself. The thought was simultaneously comforting and heartbreaking. His daughter had been brave enough to gather evidence against a human trafficker, brave enough to risk everything for women she'd never met, brave enough to die trying. County General's basement was where they kept lost and found items from emergency cases, a bureaucratic limbo for belongings waiting to be claimed or disposed of. Emma's car seat sat on a metal shelf between a teenager's skateboard and an elderly woman's walker, looking incongruously cheerful with its bright safety colors and cartoon animal designs. Rivera laid it on an examination table and began the methodical process of taking it apart, removing padding and unscrewing plastic panels while Jack and Tom watched. 20 minutes in, Rivera's expression changed. He'd found something behind the rear padding, secured with duct tape that had been carefully hidden. A waterproof pouch, the kind kayakers use to protect their phones and wallets. Inside the pouch, a thumb drive and a folded letter. Rivera held up the thumb drive with gloved hands. This is it. This is what Sarah died for. Jack reached for the letter, but Rivera intercepted him. Evidence, we need to process everything properly before... Agent Rivera, Jack said quietly, the tone he'd used for 40 years when he needed someone to understand he wasn't making a request. That letter is from my daughter. I haven't spoken to her in 15 years. I watched her die in a wrecked car while her baby was freezing in the back seat. Let me read the goddamn letter, Rivera hesitated, then handed it over. Jack unfolded the paper with shaking hands, Sarah's handwriting swimming in front of his eyes until he blinked away the tears that wanted to come. He'd recognize that writing anywhere. Neat and precise, the way Nancy had taught her, every letter formed carefully. To whoever finds my daughter, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and my daughter Emma is alive because someone cared enough to save her. I don't know who you are. Maybe police, maybe stranger, maybe my father, though I doubt it. He wouldn't have been on that road. He stopped driving at night after Mom died. Too many memories. Jack's vision blurred. Sarah had been wrong about that. Wrong about so much, and now he'd never get to tell her. But whoever you are, thank you. Emma is innocent in all this. Please protect her. My name is Catherine Sullivan. People called me Sarah. I've been working for Volkov Enterprises for 3 years. Didn't know it was front for trafficking until 8 months ago. By then, pregnant with Emma. Victor Volkov said if I tried to leave or talk, he'd kill her. So I stayed, documented everything, made copies. The USB drive in this bag contains banking records, offshore accounts, shipping manifests, routes through Canadian border, client lists, buyers of trafficked women, communication logs, encrypted messages decoded. It's everything FBI needs to destroy Volkov's operation. Jack had to stop reading, had to press his palm against his chest where something sharp was trying to break through his ribs. Sarah had been trapped, threatened, forced to participate in something monstrous because the alternative was losing Emma. And she gathered evidence anyway, risked everything anyway, prepared her own testimony, even knowing it might cost her life. 3 days ago, I contacted FBI, offered to testify in exchange for witness protection. Victor found out. Don't know how. Maybe Mole and FBI. Maybe I was careless. Tonight I'm running, taking Emma to safety, then contacting FBI again from secure location. If you're reading this, I didn't make it. The words on the page started to swim again. Jack forced himself to keep reading, to hear Sarah's voice one last time, even if it was only in writing. Please give this drive to authorities. And please, if my father's alive, tell him I'm sorry. Sorry for walking away after Mom's funeral. Sorry for the cruel things I said. Sorry for not calling, not writing, not trying to heal the rift. I was angry. At him for being so closed off. At myself for being just like him. At Mom for dying and leaving us broken. But I understand now. Dad showed love the only way he knew how. Through action, not words. Through protection, not affection. When Emma was born, I realized that's still love. Imperfect, maybe, but real. Jack couldn't see the words anymore, couldn't breathe past the grief closing his throat. Sarah had forgiven him. Not in person, not with the reconciliation he'd spent 15 years too proud to pursue, but she'd forgiven him, understood him, seen past his failures to the intention underneath. Tell him I forgive him. Tell him I hope he can forgive me. Tell him I named Emma after Mom, Emma Nancy Sullivan. Of course she had. Nancy would have loved that, would have cried happy tears at the idea of her name continuing through another generation. Jack wished desperately that he could tell his wife about this, could share this moment of grace even as it broke him. Tell him I finally understand what he tried to teach me. Strength isn't showing no emotion. It's showing up even when you're breaking inside. He showed up for Mom every day for 30 years, even as she died. I should have seen that. Jack was crying now, silent tears that he didn't bother wiping away. Tom had turned away to give him privacy, and Rivera was pretending to examine the thumb drive while Jack fell apart in a hospital basement. If he's reading this himself, Dad, I'm sorry, I love you. I always did. The words he'd needed to hear for 15 years, delivered too late and in the wrong medium but real nonetheless. Sarah had loved him. Despite everything, despite his failures and silences and inability to be the father she needed, she'd loved him. Please take care of my daughter. Be the grandfather I know you can be. Don't shut her out like you shut me out. Let her in. Let her see you break. Let her heal you. You're dying, aren't you? Mom said cancer runs in your family. You smoke like a chimney. Don't waste what time you have. Live it with Emma. Really live it. Jack almost laughed through his tears. Sarah had known. Somehow she'd known he'd be sick, had anticipated his mortality, had left him instructions for how to spend his final months. He wondered if she'd also known he'd quit smoking 30 years ago, if she'd known he'd already been diagnosed when she died. Probably not, but she'd known him well enough to understand that he'd need permission to be vulnerable, need someone to tell him it was okay to let Emma see past the stoic exterior to the frightened man underneath. Show her who you are, the man Mom loved, the man I loved, even when I was too angry to admit it. Be there. That's all I ask. I love you, Daddy. Sarah Jack folded the letter carefully, creasing it along the lines Sarah had made, and stood with it clutched in his hand. He walked past Rivera and Tom without speaking, through the door and down the hallway until he found a bathroom where he could lock himself in a stall and finally let the grief come. It tore through him like a physical force. 30 years of accumulated silence breaking apart into sobs that hurt his ribs and made his lungs burn. He cried for Sarah, for Nancy, for all the years he'd wasted being too proud and too scared to say simple words. He cried for Emma, who would grow up without her mother. He cried for himself, dying man, who'd been given one last chance to get it right and had no idea if he was capable of doing so. When the storm passed, Jack washed his face with cold water and studied his reflection in the spotted mirror. 65 years old and looking older, weathered skin and gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. The face of a man who'd done his job competently for 4 decades but failed at the things that actually mattered. Nancy used to tell him he was too hard on himself, used to kiss him and say he was exactly the man she needed. Jack had never believed her. Now he had to believe he could be what Emma needed, because Sarah had asked and he owed her at least that much. Back in the examination room, Rivera was on his phone coordinating with his superiors while Tom waited patiently. Jack approached and Rivera ended his call. The thumb drive has everything Sarah claimed. Banking records that lead straight to Volkov, manifests showing routes and schedules, communications that implicate half a dozen other people in his network. We can move on this immediately. Arrest warrants, asset seizures, the works. Sarah's evidence is going to take down the entire operation. Good. Mr. Sullivan, I need that letter. It's part of the chain of custody. Jack looked at the folded paper in his hand, Sarah's last words to him. No, it's evidence. It's a letter from my dead daughter. You've got the thumb drive. That's what matters. The letter stays with me. Rivera started to argue, but Tom intervened. Let him keep it. The thumb drive is what you need for prosecution. Personal correspondence isn't relevant. Rivera clearly disagreed, but recognized when a fight wasn't worth having. Fine. But Mr. Sullivan, you need to understand what happens next. We move on Volkov. He's going to know the evidence came from somewhere. He's going to assume it was in Sarah's possession when she died. He's going to come looking. Let him come. You're not law enforcement anymore. You can't protect yourself, let alone a 6-month-old baby. Watch me. Tom's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, came back a moment later with an odd expression. Jack, we've got a situation. Someone's at County General asking about Emma. Says he's her father. Cole Warren had cleaned up for the hospital visit, jeans instead of leathers, a button-down shirt that almost passed for respectable, his long hair tied back. But the tattoos visible on his forearms and the iron oath ring on his right hand gave away his affiliation to anyone who knew what to look for. He stood in the pediatric wing waiting area, deliberately calm, hands loose at his sides in the posture of someone who knew how to fight but wasn't looking for one. Jack approached with Tom and Rivera flanking him, three cops, current or former, presenting a unified front. Cole watched them come with eyes that assessed and calculated, the kind of situational awareness that came from years of living one wrong move away from violence. Jack spoke first, keeping his voice level. "You're Cole Warren, not a question." Cole nodded. "You're Jack Sullivan, Sarah's father." "How'd you know I'd be here?" "Small county, word travels. Heard about the accident, heard about Emma, figured you'd be wherever she was." The man had logic on his side. Jack crossed his arms, the classic cop stance that said he was listening but not convinced. "You're Emma's father." Again, not a question. Cole's jaw tightened. "Yes. Can you prove that?" Cole pulled out his phone, thumbed through photos, held it up. The screen showed Sarah and Cole together, Sarah very pregnant and laughing at something off camera. Another photo of Cole holding a newborn Emma, his face transformed by an expression of wonder that looked out of place on someone with prison time and gang affiliations. A third photo of all three of them, a family portrait taken in Sarah's apartment. "Sarah and I were together 2 years. She got pregnant. I asked her to marry me. She said not yet. Not until she could get clear of Volkov. You knew she was working for a human trafficker." Cole's expression hardened. "I knew she worked for Volkov Enterprises doing books. She told me what it really was 8 months ago, after Emma was born. Said she was scared, said Volkov threatened our daughter, said she couldn't leave without evidence to protect herself. I told her to run. She said running wouldn't fix it, wouldn't save the other women, wouldn't stop Volkov from coming after us eventually. So she gathered evidence instead. Yeah, against my advice. I told her it was too dangerous, told her to let the FBI handle it. She said the FBI couldn't help without proof, and by the time they built a case the traditional way, more women would be hurt." Sarah was, Cole's voice caught slightly. She was stubborn. Once she decided something was right, you couldn't talk her out of it. Jack recognized that stubbornness. He'd passed it down to Sarah through genetics and example. That Sullivan trait of digging in your heels and refusing to bend even when bending was the smart play. "Where were you 3 nights ago?" "Billings, at the clubhouse. 30 witnesses can confirm." Rivera stepped forward, badge visible on his belt. "Mr. Warren, I'm Agent Rivera, FBI. We're investigating your partner's death. We have some questions about your connection to Viktor Volkov." Cole's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a wariness settling in. "I don't have a connection to Volkov. Sarah did. I stayed clear because prison already cost me enough time with my daughter. I wasn't risking more." "Did Sarah tell you she contacted the FBI?" "No, she said she was working on something but didn't give details. Said it was safer if I didn't know." "Last time we talked was 2 days before she died. She called from a burner phone, said she loved me, said she was getting Emma somewhere safe, and she'd contact me when it was clear. But she didn't. She died before she could." The grief in Cole's voice sounded genuine, but Jack had interrogated enough criminals to know grief could be performed. The question was whether Cole had any reason to want Sarah dead. If he was telling the truth about staying clear of Volkov, about wanting Sarah to quit working for the organization, then her death cost him the woman he loved and his daughter's mother. But if he was lying, if he'd been involved with Volkov's operation and Sarah's testimony would have implicated him, then killing her made a certain terrible sense. "I want to see my daughter." Tom spoke up. "Emma's in state custody pending investigation of her mother's death and determination of paternity. You'll need to provide DNA samples and wait for legal process." "How long? Depends. With a cooperative sample, maybe a week." Cole's hands clenched into fists, then deliberately relaxed. "A week. Fine. Where do I give the sample?" Jack watched this exchange and made a decision that probably wasn't smart but felt necessary. "You can see her. 5 minutes. Supervised." Everyone turned to look at him. Tom started to object, but Jack cut him off. "I'm her legal guardian until custody is determined. I'm allowing a supervised visit. Agent Rivera, you'll supervise. Document everything. If Warren makes any moves you don't like, you intervene." Rivera looked skeptical but nodded. 5 minutes. They walked together to Emma's room, an odd procession of law enforcement and outlaw. Emma was awake, lying in her warming bassinet and making the small noises babies make when they were working themselves up to a proper cry. Cole stopped in the doorway as if he'd hit an invisible wall, staring at his daughter with naked longing. "Hey, baby girl, it's Daddy." Emma's fussing stopped. She turned her head toward Cole's voice, eyes trying to focus. Cole moved forward slowly, hands shaking as he reached into the bassinet. Rivera tensed but didn't intervene. Cole lifted Emma with the careful competence of someone who'd done this before, cradling her against his chest. Emma settled immediately, one tiny hand finding Cole's shirt and gripping tight. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Cole was crying silently, tears running down his face into his beard. Emma made a small, contented sound, the kind of noise that said she recognized this person, trusted this person, felt safe in these arms. Jack watched and felt something complicated twist in his chest. This man was Emma's father, had been present for her birth and first months, had loved Sarah and lost her. The instinct to protect Emma warred with the recognition that taking her from Cole would be doing to him what the estrangement had done to Jack, removing a child from someone who loved them. But there were questions that needed answering first. Questions about Cole's true relationship with Volkov, about his club's activities, about whether Emma would be safe in the custody of an ex-con biker with gang affiliations. Rivera was watching Cole with the analytical gaze of someone running calculations, weighing evidence, building a case. The 5 minutes passed too quickly. Cole kissed Emma's forehead and handed her back to Jack with obvious reluctance. "Take care of her. I intend to. Sarah trusted you." At the end, she was driving toward your house when she crashed. The information hit Jack like a punch. He stared at Cole. "What?" "Highway 47 heading southeast. Your house is 12 miles past the crash site. She was bringing Emma to you, to her grandfather. That was her plan if everything went wrong. Get Emma to family, someone Volkov wouldn't think to look." Jack felt tears burning again. Sarah had been coming home. After 15 years, after all the silence and distance, she'd been driving through a blizzard to bring her daughter to the father she'd walked away from. Not to reconcile. She hadn't known Jack would be on the road that night, but because, despite everything, she believed he would protect Emma. Believed in him when he'd given her no reason to. "I'll keep her safe." Cole nodded, then looked at Rivera. "Agent, when you move on Volkov, and I assume that's happening soon, you let me know. The Iron Oath has a score to settle. Man kills one of our own. There's a reckoning coming." "That sounds like a threat. It's a promise, but we're not stupid. We'll wait until you've got him in custody. After that, prison justice is a different kind of law." Rivera's expression said this conversation was moving into territory he couldn't officially acknowledge. Tom cleared his throat. "Mr. Warren, you should leave now. We'll be in touch about the paternity test." Cole left without arguing, pausing at the door to look back at Emma one more time. Then he was gone, footsteps echoing down the hospital hallway. Jack lowered Emma back into the bassinet, his arms suddenly weak. He's telling the truth. About loving Sarah, about being Emma's father. Tom sighed, probably. But that doesn't mean he's clean. Iron Oath has been under investigation for years. Drugs, weapons, assault charges that never stick because witnesses change their minds. Cole Warren went to prison for manslaughter, Jack. He beat a man to death in a bar fight. In a bar fight, not murder. There's a difference, is there? To the man who died? Jack couldn't argue that point. But he also couldn't shake the image of Cole holding Emma, the genuine grief and love in the man's face. Whatever else Cole Warren might be, he was a father who'd lost his daughter's mother. That created a kinship Jack understood all too well. Rivera's phone buzzed. He checked it, expression shifting. "Warrants came through. We're moving on Volkov tonight. Multi-agency coordinated raids across Montana, Idaho, and Washington. By tomorrow morning, his entire network should be dismantled." "Good. Mr. Sullivan, you need to take Emma somewhere safe. Volkov's going to know someone provided evidence. He might make a move before we can arrest him. Where's somewhere safe? My house is 12 miles from where Sarah died." "Everyone knows where I live. Then go somewhere else. Hotel, safe house. Anywhere but here or home. Jack thought about this, about packing up a 6-month-old baby and running, about living in fear of a Russian mobster with enough resources to track down anyone he wanted to find. The idea was exhausting. He was already dying, already running out of time. The thought of spending his final months in hiding, looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows, it felt like a waste of whatever was left. No, excuse me, I'm not running. Volkov wants the evidence? It's with the FBI now. He wants Emma? He'll have to go through me. And I'm not running. Tom grabbed Jack's arm. Don't be stupid. You're 65 years old with stage 3 cancer. You can't protect yourself, let alone a baby. Stage 4, actually. The words came out before Jack had consciously decided to share the information. Tom and Rivera both stared at him. Tom's grip tightened. What? Had a follow-up with Dr. Morrison this morning while you were coordinating with the FBI. Cancers progress faster than expected. Stage 4 now, 3 months, maybe less. The silence that followed was profound. Tom's face had gone pale. Rivera's carefully neutral mask slipping to show genuine shock. Jack pulled his arm free and continued as if discussing the weather. So you'll excuse me if I don't want to spend my last 3 months hiding in a safe house. I'm taking Emma home, setting up proper security. If Volkov comes, I'll handle it. If he doesn't, I spend what time I have left being Emma's grandfather instead of some anonymous old man dying in a hotel room. Jack, my decision, Tom, not yours, not the FBI's, mine. He picked up Emma, wrapping her in blankets against the cold, and walked toward the door. Behind him, Tom and Rivera exchanged looks that Jack didn't need to see to interpret. They thought he was being irrational, reckless, letting grief and anger override common sense. Maybe they were right, but Jack had spent 65 years making the sensible choice, the safe choice, and where had it gotten him? A dead wife and a strange daughter, and 3 months before cancer finished him. For once, he was going to do what felt right instead of what looked smart. The drive home was quiet, Emma sleeping in her car seat while Jack navigated familiar roads. The Sullivan house appeared around a curve, Victorian architecture looking tired in afternoon light. Jack pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, engine idling, looking at the home he'd shared with Nancy for 3 decades. She'd loved this house, had picked it specifically for the wraparound porch and the turret room she'd turned into a reading nook. After she died, Jack had left everything exactly as she'd arranged it, turning the house into a museum of their life together. Now he was bringing Emma home. Nancy's granddaughter, Sarah's daughter, and the museum would have to become a living space again. Baby-proofing and bottles and diapers and all the chaos that came with infants. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and oddly comforting. The house needed life in it again, needed to remember its purpose. Jack carried Emma inside, laid her carefully on the couch cushions surrounded by pillows so she couldn't roll off, and began the process of transforming his home. The first-floor guest room became Emma's nursery. Jack moved furniture, cleaned surfaces, assembled the borrowed crib that Tom had dropped off earlier. His body protested every motion, arthritis and cancer and exhaustion combining into a symphony of pain, but he pushed through. This needed doing. By evening, the nursery was functional, if not perfect. Crib set up, changing table organized, supplies stocked from a frantic trip to the pharmacy that had left Jack bewildered by the sheer variety of baby products available. How had parenting become so complicated? When Sarah was born, they'd needed diapers and formula and maybe some rattles. Now there were 17 different types of bottles and 40 brands of wipes and elaborate contraptions for everything from warming bottles to sterilizing pacifiers. Emma woke around 6, crying in that escalating way that meant she'd gone from mildly uncomfortable to seriously upset. Jack picked her up, checked her diaper, wet, and attempted his first solo diaper change. 20 frustrating minutes later, he'd succeeded in getting a new diaper on without causing injury, though the tabs were crooked and he'd gone through 4 wipes instead of the 2 the instructions suggested. Emma looked up at him with what might have been amusement or just gas. Okay, diaper done. Now what? Feeding, right, formula. Jack carried Emma to the kitchen and stared at the formula supplies he'd bought, suddenly uncertain. Powder plus water equals food for babies. He understood that much. But ratios? Temperature? Sterilization? The instructions might as well have been written in code. He called Amy, the paramedic who'd helped with Emma's initial rescue. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Sullivan, is everything okay? I need a crash course in infant care. Specifically, how do I make a bottle without killing my granddaughter?" Amy laughed, not unkindly. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." True to her word, Amy arrived with armfuls of supplies and the kind of patient competence that came from raising 3 kids of her own. She walked Jack through bottle preparation, burping techniques, signs of distress, sleep schedules, and a dozen other things he should have learned 30 years ago but had left to Nancy. Emma took the bottle Amy prepared with enthusiasm, solving at least one immediate problem. "You're going to need help," Amy said as she showed Jack how to properly support Emma's head during feeding. 6-month-olds require constant attention, feeding every 4 hours, diaper changes, developmental activities. And you're dying, I know. I was going to say recovering from a traumatic night, but yes, that too. Jack looked at Emma, drinking her formula with single-minded determination. "I'll manage. No one manages alone. Let me make some calls. I know women from church who'd be willing to come during the day, help with Emma while you rest. I don't want strangers. They won't be strangers after a day. This is what community does, Mr. Sullivan. We show up. Let us." Jack wanted to argue, but exhaustion was winning. The adrenaline that had carried him through the past 24 hours was completely gone now, leaving behind a fatigue so profound he could barely keep his eyes open. Amy must have seen it on his face. "When did you last sleep?" Jack couldn't remember. Yesterday morning? Before the cancer diagnosis? Time had become elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made chronology difficult. "I'll stay tonight," Amy said. "Take first shift with Emma. You sleep. Properly, in a bed, for at least 6 hours. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor." "Close enough." Jack was too tired to argue. He showed Amy where things were. Bottles in the kitchen, diapers in the nursery, his number by the phone, and then climbed the stairs to his bedroom. Nancy's side of the bed was still made the way she'd left it 3 years ago, sheets smooth and pillows arranged just so. Jack had slept on his half exclusively since she died, never disturbing her side, maintaining the fiction that she might come back and need it. Tonight he lay down in the middle, taking up space he hadn't claimed in years, and closed his eyes. Sleep came immediately, dragging him under into dreams where Sarah was alive and Nancy was healthy, and Emma was just a possibility instead of a reality sleeping downstairs in the care of a kind stranger. Jack woke to sunlight streaming through windows he'd forgotten to close and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. For one disoriented moment he thought Nancy was downstairs making breakfast, that the past 3 years had been a nightmare he'd finally escaped. Then memory reassembled itself. Nancy dead, Sarah dead, Emma alive and sleeping somewhere below him. The cancer eating through his lungs sent a reminder spike of pain across his chest. Stage 4, 3 months if he was lucky. Downstairs, Amy had taken over his kitchen with the efficiency of someone used to managing chaos. Emma sat in a borrowed infant seat on the table, chewing on her fist and watching Amy move between stove and counter. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that Jack stopped in the doorway just absorbing it. Life continuing despite death. Breakfast happening despite grief. A baby being cared for because that's what babies needed, regardless of the circumstances that brought them here. "You're up." Amy poured coffee into the mug Nancy had given him 20 years ago, the one with a faded sheriff's badge and text that read, "World's okayest dad." Sarah had picked it out as a joke gift, laughing at Jack's bewildered expression when he'd unwrapped it. He'd used it every morning since. Emma had a good night, woke twice for bottles, back to sleep within 30 minutes both times. "You've got a relatively easy baby." Jack accepted the coffee and sank into a chair across from his granddaughter. Emma had discovered her feet sometime during the night, or maybe she'd always known about them, and Jack just hadn't been paying attention. She grabbed her toes with intense concentration, the kind of focus adults lost somewhere along the way to growing up. "I made calls. 3 women from church are splitting shifts this week, morning, afternoon, and evening. They'll teach you what you need to know, help with Emma, make sure you're eating. I can feed myself. Can you? When's the last time you had a real meal?" Jack couldn't remember. Since before the diagnosis? Everything since had been coffee and adrenaline and the occasional granola bar scavenged from the truck's glove compartment. That's what I thought. Eleanor Pritchard is coming at 9. She raised 5 kids and has more patience than anyone I have ever met. Let her help. The doorbell rang before Jack could argue. Amy checked the window and her expression shifted to something more complicated. Speaking of help, you've got company. Cole Warren stood on the porch with a woman Jack didn't recognize. Mid-40s, silver streaking her dark hair, leather jacket over jeans. Behind them, 3 more Iron Oath members waited by their motorcycles parked in Jack's driveway. The domestic mourning scene had just acquired an edge. Jack opened the door, but didn't invite them in. Cole looked tired, like he'd spent the night riding instead of sleeping. The woman beside him had the kind of alert stillness that came from military training or long experience with violence. Mr. Sullivan, this is Diana Cross. We call her Diesel. She's road captain for the Montana chapter. Diana extended her hand and Jack shook it automatically. Her grip was firm without being aggressive, the handshake of someone who'd learned to navigate male-dominated spaces by being competent enough that gender became irrelevant. We heard about the FBI raid plans. Volkov's going to know someone talked. He's going to come for Emma. Jack's hand moved instinctively to his hip, where his service weapon used to sit before he remembered he'd retired 5 years ago, and the gun was locked in a safe upstairs. So you can't protect her alone. We're offering help. I don't need help from an outlaw motorcycle gang. Cole's jaw tightened, but Diana spoke before he could. Outlaw's just a word people use when they don't understand brotherhood. We protect our own. Emma's one of ours. That makes you family by extension, like it or not. I don't need, you have stage 4 cancer and you're 65 years old. 3 men with guns could take you and Emma without breaking a sweat. Pride's a luxury you can't afford anymore. The blunt assessment stung because it was accurate. Jack had spent 40 years being the strongest person in any room, the one who handled threats and protected civilians and maintained order. Now he was dying and weak and responsible for a baby who couldn't defend herself. The mathematics were simple, even if accepting them burned. What are you proposing? We set up security, cameras, motion sensors, perimeter patrols, members rotate through on watch. Volkov makes a move. We're ready. And what do you get out of this? Cole spoke quietly. I get to protect my daughter. That's all I've wanted since Sarah told me she was pregnant. Protect them both. I failed with Sarah. I'm not failing Emma. Jack studied Cole's face, looking for deception and finding only exhausted sincerity. Whatever else this man might be, he loved his daughter. That counted for something. Fine, but my house, my rules. No drugs, no weapons visible to Emma, no club business conducted here. Your security, nothing else. Diana nodded, agreed. We'll start installations this afternoon. They left in a rumble of engines that rattled the windows. Amy appeared beside Jack with Emma in her arms. You sure about this? No, but I'm not sure about anything anymore. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity that transformed Jack's quiet Victorian into something resembling a command center. Iron Oath members installed cameras covering every approach to the house, motion sensors in the yard, reinforced the doors with steel core replacements that looked like wood but could withstand a battering ram. Diana moved into the guest room upstairs, her presence oddly comforting despite Jack's initial resistance. She was competent with Emma, former military training translating smoothly to infant care. Both required attention to detail, ability to function on minimal sleep, and staying calm under pressure. Eleanor Pritchard from the church arrived each morning at 9 with casseroles and patience, teaching Jack the small rituals of baby care that Amy had introduced, but he hadn't absorbed. How to recognize different types of cries, how to properly support Emma during tummy time, how to baby-proof a house that had accumulated 65 years of dangerous objects. Other women came in shifts, creating a rotation of care that meant Emma was never alone and Jack was never overwhelmed. Tom stopped by on the second day with news about the FBI raids. Rivera's team had arrested Victor Volkov at his home in Billings, along with 17 members of his organization across 3 states. Evidence from Sarah's thumb drive had led to bank account seizures totaling $40 million and the rescue of 12 women currently being held in various locations. It was a clean operation, the kind that made headlines and justified budget allocations and reminded people that federal law enforcement occasionally did exactly what it was supposed to do. Volkov lawyered up immediately, refused to talk, refused to cooperate, sat in his cell with the calm certainty of a man who believed money and connections would eventually secure his release. But Sarah's evidence was airtight. Banking records matched to penny, shipping manifests corroborated by customs logs, communication intercepts verified through metadata. The case was strong enough that even expensive lawyers couldn't find meaningful gaps. "He'll die in prison," Tom said. "Multiple life sentences, no possibility of parole. Justice for Sarah." Jack wanted to feel satisfaction, but mostly felt empty. Volkov in prison didn't bring Sarah back, didn't give him the years he'd lost to stubborn silence, didn't cure the cancer eating his lungs. It was better than Volkov walking free, certainly better than Emma growing up with that threat hanging over her. But it wasn't healing, it wasn't redemption, it was just the bare minimum of accountability. On the fourth day, Jack's body began its steeper decline. The pain that had been manageable with over-the-counter medication suddenly required prescription opioids that left him foggy and disconnected. Dr. Morrison made a house call and delivered the news Jack had been expecting. The cancer was accelerating faster than any model predicted, likely stress-induced, definitely terminal. Weeks now instead of months. Maybe a month if Jack was very lucky, and luck was generous. "You need hospice care. We can set up a hospital bed, pain management protocols, end-of-life planning." The clinical language made dying sound like a project with deliverables and timelines. Jack supposed it was, in a way, the ultimate deadline that no amount of planning could extend. "Fine, whatever you need to do. But I'm staying conscious as long as possible. Emma needs someone who recognizes her, not a drug shell." Morrison's expression said this was negotiable, but he didn't push. He prescribed lower doses of stronger medications, a balancing act between pain management and cognitive function that would become harder to maintain as the cancer progressed. Jack took the pills and felt the pain recede to manageable levels, felt his thoughts clear enough to focus on immediate tasks. Emma was sitting up now with support, had discovered that banging objects together made noise, was starting to show personality beyond basic needs. She smiled when Jack entered rooms, recognized his voice, reached for him with a trust that terrified him. He was going to die and abandon her just like everyone else in her short life had died or disappeared. The thought kept him awake despite the medications, staring at the ceiling and calculating how many days he had left to make sure Emma's future was secure. Diana found him in the nursery at 3 in the morning on the fifth day, sitting in the rocking chair with Emma asleep on his chest. She didn't say anything, just brought him tea and sat in the doorway keeping quiet company. After 20 minutes, she spoke. "I had a son, Jackson. Lost him to leukemia when he was 8. Jack looked over. Diana was staring at Emma with an expression he recognized, the look of someone remembering a child who wasn't coming back. "I was Army medic, served 2 tours in Iraq, saved dozens of lives, maybe hundreds, but couldn't save my own kid. Couldn't save the one life that mattered most. I'm sorry. After he died, I tried to die too. Pills, alcohol, planning ways to make it look like an accident. Cole found me in a parking lot about to swallow a bottle of Oxy. He sat with me for 3 hours. Didn't say much, just sat. Then he drove me to the clubhouse, put me in a spare room, stayed up all night making sure I didn't try again." Jack had seen that kind of grief. Spouses who lost their will to continue after partners died. Parents who couldn't survive their children. 40 years of law enforcement had taught him that some losses were simply too large to absorb. Next morning, he offered me a patch. Said anyone who survived the worst thing was strong enough to be useful. Said Iron Oath needed that strength. "And you said yes." I said yes. "Been riding 9 years. They're my family now." Cole saved my life, so when he needed help protecting his daughter, I showed up. That's what family does. Jack understood. Not the motorcycle club specifically, but the principle underneath. Loyalty born from shared trauma, family chosen rather than assigned, showing up because someone once showed up for you. Emma stirred against his chest, and Diana stood. "Let me take her. You need sleep." Jack wanted to argue, but his body was done pretending it had reserves left. He handed Emma over and watched Diana settle her back into the crib with practiced ease, then stumbled to his bedroom and collapsed. Sleep took him immediately, dragging him down into dreams where cancer didn't exist, and daughters didn't die, and grandfathers had time. The attack came on the sixth day, late afternoon when the light was starting to fade and Jack was feeding Emma in the kitchen while Diana checked camera feeds upstairs. The motion sensors went off first, silent alerts to phones and tablets that Jack had learned to monitor obsessively. Three vehicles approaching from the access road that ran behind his property, coming fast enough to kick up dust visible on the cameras. Diana was downstairs in seconds, phone in hand. "We've got company." Three SUVs, blacked out windows. Could be nothing. Could be Volkov's people. "I thought FBI arrested everyone. Everyone they knew about. Volkov's operation was bigger than 17 arrests." Diana called Cole, her voice clipped and professional. "Need backup at Sullivan's. Multiple vehicles inbound, unknown hostiles." ETA? Jack heard Cole's response through the phone. 10 minutes. Stall them. 10 minutes was a long time when people with guns wanted in your house. Jack handed Emma to Diana. "Take her upstairs. Bathroom away from windows. Don't come out until it's clear." "What are you going to do?" "What I've done for 40 years. Jack's service weapon was still in the safe, but he had other options. The shotgun Nancy had insisted they keep after a string of rural burglaries 20 years ago, loaded with buckshot and kept in the hall closet where she could reach it if someone broke in while Jack was at work. He'd argued they didn't need it, argued that crime rates didn't justify paranoia. Nancy had bought it anyway, taken shooting lessons at the range, practiced until she could hit center mass at 20 feet. Jack had never told her how much that competence turned him on. The shotgun felt heavier than it should, or maybe Jack was just weaker. Stage 4 cancer in 65 years made weapon handling harder than muscle memory wanted to admit. He checked the load, 5 shells, and chambered around. The mechanical sound was familiar and comforting. The same rack and click he'd heard thousands of times during training and traffic stops and the handful of situations that had actually required pointing a weapon at another human. The SUV stopped at the property line, just visible through the front windows. Doors opened and 6 men emerged, all dressed in dark tactical gear that looked military surplus. Professional, organized, not random criminals but soldiers following orders. Jack's cop brain cataloged details automatically. Body armor, automatic weapons, moving in formation with practiced coordination. These weren't local thugs. These were Volkov's cleanup crew, sent to recover evidence and eliminate witnesses before FBI could build complete cases. One man approached the porch while the others fanned out, covering angles. Jack met him at the door with the shotgun visible but pointed at the ground. The man stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Jack could see his face clearly. Slavic features, cold eyes, a scar running through his left eyebrow. Combat veteran, Jack guessed. Someone who'd seen violence and decided to make it a profession. The man spoke with a thick accent. "Mr. Sullivan, we need to talk about property that doesn't belong to you. Talk from there. You're not coming in my house. This doesn't have to be difficult. Give us the baby. Tell us where's evidence. We leave. Simple. Baby's not property, and evidence is with FBI. You're too late." The man smiled without warmth. "FBI has copy. We want original, and baby is insurance. Victor's orders." Victor's in federal custody facing life sentences. His orders don't mean much anymore. Victor has long arms, longer than FBI believes. "Now, baby, or we take her." Jack raised the shotgun to low ready, finger on the trigger guard but not committed yet. "You're welcome to try, but I was sheriff here for 35 years. This is my property. Montana has good stand-your-ground laws. I can shoot anyone who threatens my family on my land, and it's legally justified. You are dying man with one gun. We are 6 men with automatic weapons. Mathematics is simple." The man had a point. Jack was outnumbered, outgunned, and operating a body that was failing in real time. But he'd spent 40 years learning that fights weren't won by whoever had the most firepower. They were won by whoever was willing to go furthest. And Jack had 3 months to live. These men had careers and futures and reasons to survive. That gave him an edge they didn't expect. "Tell you what," Jack said conversationally. First man through my door, I'm putting buckshot through his chest. Second man probably gets me, but that first man dies screaming. You want to volunteer? The man's expression shifted slightly, calculating odds and assessing commitment. Jack held his gaze, letting him see the truth. Jack Sullivan had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The worst they could do was kill him, which cancer was doing anyway. The worst he could do was take several of them with him, which he would do without hesitation. Before the standoff could resolve, motorcycle engines roared up the driveway. Iron Oath arriving, 12 bikes carrying riders in leather and denim. Cole dismounted first, flanked by members carrying weapons that made Jack's shotgun look like a toy. The tactical balance had just shifted dramatically. Cole walked up to stand beside Jack, voice calm but carrying a threat underneath. You boys lost? This is private property. The Slavic man reassessed the situation, outnumbered now instead of holding advantage. His hand moved toward a radio on his belt. Cole's hand moved faster toward the pistol under his jacket. The message was clear. Call for backup, and this becomes a shooting war nobody walks away from. We will be back. Looking forward to it. The 6 men retreated to their SUVs and left in a controlled withdrawal that suggested military discipline. Jack's hands were shaking, adrenaline dump making the shotgun waver. Cole gently took it from him. You okay? Just fantastic. Dying man holds off armed assault. Regular Tuesday afternoon. Diana appeared from inside with Emma, who was crying at the disruption to her routine. Jack's heart rate started to normalize as he took his granddaughter, her solid weight and baby soap smell, grounding him back to reality. This was what mattered. Emma safe, Emma fed, Emma growing up somewhere better than wherever Volkov's people came from. Cole made calls on his cell, organizing perimeter security and coordinating with Tom about the attempted assault. Sheriff's Department would send deputies, but the response time was 20 minutes minimum, too slow to matter in a real firefight. The Iron Oath would maintain watch rotation through the night, armed and ready for Volkov's people to make another attempt. Jack carried Emma inside to the nursery, sinking into the rocking chair because standing was becoming difficult. The cancer was eating his strength in visible increments now, each day weaker than the last. Dr. Morrison's estimate of weeks was optimistic. Jack figured he had days, maybe 2 weeks if his body was stubborn about dying. Not enough time. Never enough time. Diana brought him water and pain medication, waited while he swallowed pills with hands that shook. That was stupid. Brave, but stupid. You could have been killed, would have been killed if Cole hadn't shown up, but Emma would have been safe. That's what mattered. Emma needs you alive, not martyred. Emma needs someone alive. Doesn't have to be me. Diana's expression said she disagreed, but arguing with dying men was pointless. Jack rocked slowly, Emma settling against his chest the way she did when the world got too loud. 6 months old and already learning that Grandpa's heartbeat meant safety, that this weathered old man with cancer eating his lungs would stand between her and harm until his body quit completely. That night, Jack began writing letters, one to Emma for when she turned 18, words he needed to say but she was too young to understand. One to Cole and Diana for after Jack died, instructions about Emma's care, and requests to tell her stories about Sarah and Nancy. One to Sarah to be buried with him. Words that should have been said 15 years ago, but maybe still counted if delivered to a grave. The writing exhausted him. Simple sentences required concentration he didn't have, pen feeling heavy as a sledgehammer. But he pushed through because these words mattered, were maybe the last thing that would matter. Emma asleep in her crib beside his bed, Diana on watch downstairs, Iron Oath members patrolling the property line. An armed camp built around protecting one 6-month-old baby from men who saw her as leverage. Tom came by in the morning with news that made the previous day's attack make sense. FBI had discovered Volkov had a brother, Dmitry Volkov, living in Seattle, running his own trafficking operation parallel to Victor's. When Victor went down, Dmitry assumed control of the Montana territory. The 6 men who'd come for Emma were Dmitry's people, sent to recover whatever evidence Sarah had gathered that might implicate the broader organization. But Sarah's thumb drive is with FBI. They have everything. They have financial records and manifests for Victor's operation. But Sarah mentioned in her call about secondary servers, backups, redundancies. Dimitri thinks those backups are somewhere Sarah had access to. And since Sarah was coming here when she died, Dimitri assumes the backups are with you. Jack wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Sarah bringing backup servers to her estranged father's house? Hiding evidence in a place she hadn't visited in 15 years? It made no sense unless her car. We searched her apartment, searched the car seat. Did anyone check the actual vehicle thoroughly? Tom's expression shifted. Impound lot, I'll call it in. Within 2 hours, Rivera arrived with a forensics team and Sarah's wrecked Honda Civic. They found it behind a panel in the trunk, a portable hard drive wrapped in waterproof material, still intact despite the crash. Dimitri had been right. Sarah had been bringing everything. Every piece of evidence she'd compiled over 3 years, delivering it to her father because, even after 15 years of silence, she trusted him to do the right thing. The hard drive contained enough evidence to dismantle trafficking operations across 6 states, client lists, payment records, routes into Canada, connections to legitimate businesses that provided cover. It was 3 years of Sarah's work compiled in meticulous detail, organized and annotated with the kind of precision that made Jack's chest ache. His daughter had been brilliant, brave, determined to stop something evil even knowing it would cost her life. Rivera left with the hard drive and promises of increased security. Jack didn't believe promises anymore. Security was what Cole and Diana and the Iron Oath provided. People willing to sit on his porch all night with guns. People who understood that family meant showing up when things got hard. The next week passed in a haze of pain medication and diminishing awareness. Jack's lucid periods became shorter, separated by longer stretches where the cancer had progressed into his brain and reality became negotiable. He saw Nancy sometimes, sitting in the rocking chair holding Emma. He saw Sarah as a child, laughing in the backyard. He saw himself young and strong, carrying his daughter on his shoulders while she shrieked with delight. Diana managed his care with military efficiency, coordinating with hospice nurses and Dr. Morrison to keep Jack as comfortable as possible while maintaining enough consciousness that he could spend time with Emma. Cole visited daily, sometimes just sitting in silence, sometimes talking about Sarah. Memories Jack didn't have, stories from her life after she'd left. Small gifts that rebuilt a daughter in Jack's mind, filled gaps the estrangement had created. On what turned out to be Jack's last conscious day, he asked Diana to bring Emma to his bed. She was crawling now, had figured out mobility and used it to explore everything within reach. Diana set her on the blankets, and Emma immediately crawled toward Jack's face, tiny hands patting his cheeks with the gentle violence babies employed. Jack captured one hand and kissed her palm. "I love you, Emma. Your grandpa loves you so much." The words came easier now, practice or dying removing whatever had kept them locked inside for 65 years. Emma smiled, that gummy baby smile that said she understood tone, even if words were still mysterious. Jack felt tears running down his temples into his hair. "Your mom was brave. Your grandma was kind. You've got their strength, their heart. Don't be like me, closed off, scared to speak, love out loud, live out loud." Emma babbled something that might have been agreement or just noise. Jack didn't care. She was listening, or at least present, and that was enough. "I'm sorry I'm leaving. Sorry you won't remember me, but Diana and Cole, they'll take care of you, tell you stories, show you pictures, make sure you know who you came from." Diana was crying silently in the doorway. Cole had arrived and stood beside her, also crying, neither of them trying to hide it. Jack was grateful for their tears, proof that Emma would be mourned by people who loved her, that his death would matter to someone besides himself. Dr. Morrison came that evening and increased the morphine drip. The pain had become unmanageable, was eating through whatever cognitive function Jack had left. Better to sleep now, to let the cancer finish its work without forcing Jack to endure every moment. He drifted in and out, catching fragments of conversation around him, feeling Emma's weight on his chest when Diana brought her for final goodbyes. The last thing Jack saw clearly was Emma's face inches from his, her dark eyes studying him with the serious intensity babies sometimes displayed. She reached out and touched his face, gentle this time, as if she understood something was ending. Jack tried to smile, wasn't sure if his face cooperated. He whispered words he wasn't sure she could hear. My sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Then sleep took him and didn't let go. Breathing became irregular, then shallow, then stopped. Jack Sullivan died at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, surrounded by chosen family and loved by a granddaughter who wouldn't remember him but would know his story. The funeral was small but well attended. Entire sheriff's department showed up in dress uniforms. FBI sent representatives, including Rivera, who spoke briefly about Sarah's courage and Jack's determination. Iron Oath members filled the back rows, leather and denim, in a cemetery that hadn't seen motorcycles since the last veteran's funeral. Eleanor Pritchard and the churchwomen who'd helped with Emma came. Amy came. Tom delivered a eulogy that made people cry and laugh in equal measure. Stories about Jack's 4 decades of service mixed with acknowledgement of his failures as a father and ultimate redemption as a grandfather. Diana spoke about finding family in unexpected places, about second chances and showing up. Cole stood silent, holding Emma, letting his presence say what words couldn't. The cemetery was on a hill overlooking the valley Jack had protected for 35 years. Montana stretching away in all directions under a sky so blue, it hurt to look at. They lowered Jack's casket next to Nancy's grave, 3 feet from Sarah's. The Sullivan family plot complete. 3 generations laid to rest in Montana soil. Each mourner placed a white lily on the casket. Diana's idea borrowed from the Iron Oath tradition of honoring fallen members. By the time everyone had contributed, Jack was buried under flowers. The headstone was simple granite with text that Tom and Diana had chosen together. Jack Sullivan, 1960 to 2025. Sheriff, father, grandfather. He showed up. 6 months later, spring had transformed Montana from frozen wasteland to something approaching beauty. Diana and Cole had married quietly, legal formalization of a partnership that already existed. They'd moved into the Sullivan house, keeping it as Emma's inheritance but making it their home. The Victorian had been repainted, gardens planted, life restored to rooms that had been museums for too long. Emma's first birthday party filled the backyard with people, Iron Oath members and their families. Church women who'd helped Jack, Tom and Amy and their kids, even Agent Rivera who'd driven from Billings because some cases became personal. Emma wore a tiny dress and destroyed a cake shaped like a motorcycle, smashing frosting into her face while adults laughed and took pictures. Diana stood on the porch watching, Cole beside her with his arm around her waist. Tom approached with an envelope. This came from Jack's lawyer. Instructions were to deliver it on Emma's first birthday. Inside was a video thumb drive and a note in Jack's handwriting, shaky from medication but legible. Play for Emma on her first birthday. They gathered in the living room, Diana, Cole, Tom, Emma in Diana's lap, and loaded the video. The screen showed Jack in his hospice bed a week before he died, holding Emma with visible effort. His voice was weak but clear, every word measured and deliberate. Emma, if you're watching this, I'm gone, but I want you to see me, really see me. This is your grandpa. Jack Sullivan, man who wasn't always good with words but tried. You saved me, baby girl. Gave me reason when I had none, purpose when I was lost. Your mom, Sarah, my daughter, she was brave, stronger than me. She died protecting you. Remember that. Your grandma, Nancy, my wife, she was heart I never showed. She'd have spoiled you rotten. And Diana and Cole, your parents now, they're best people I know. Listen to them. Love them. They chose you. Life's hard, Emma. Montana winters are long, but spring always comes, always. When you're sad, remember, your grandpa loved you, completely, fiercely, forever. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. And baby girl, I'm watching, always watching. Be strong, be kind, be loved. Goodbye, my Emma, goodbye. The screen went black. Diana was crying, Cole wiping his eyes, Tom clearing his throat repeatedly. Emma was oblivious, playing with her toes and babbling to herself. But someday she'd watch this video and understand. Someday she'd know about the grandfather who'd saved her life. about the mother who died protecting her, about the family that had formed around keeping her safe. Outside, spring wind blew through new leaves on old trees. The Sullivan house stood solid on its foundation, sheltering another generation. In the cemetery on the hill, white lilies had taken root around Jack's grave, spreading wild and determined. Life continuing, legacy living. Montana endured. Families endured. Love endured. Even imperfect love delivered too late by flawed people doing their best. Jack Sullivan had shown up when it mattered. His granddaughter would grow up knowing that it was enough.